Imagine living in a world where execution, yes, death, is the ultimate punishment to a crime committed. Crazy, right? What's even crazier is that we do live in that world. Ever since I became old enough to understand what the death penalty really entailed, I started to become appalled by how, despite being completely inhumane and diabolical, it is still legal in certain parts of the world, and more specifically, in many states of America. There have been so many execution cases throughout centuries, which I'm sure many of you have heard about and have seen on screens, the numerous sentencing to death cases. These cases, not to mention, could drag on for eternity. According to the class survey, about 43.8% agreed that the death penalty should be abolished, while 12.5% stated that it should not be abolished. The other 43.8% were unsure about whether or not it should remain in place. The death penalty, otherwise known as capital punishment, should ultimately be abolished because not only does it violate our human right to life, it is also inhumane, unethical, and not to mention ineffective in deterring crimes. So why should we abolish the death penalty? Well, for one, it is inhumane according to the International Human Rights Treaty. According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, every individual has the right to life, liberty, and security of his persons. In addition, America is a democratic society founded on the respect for human rights and could not recognize anyone the power to decide life or death. Second, it disproportionately affects certain groups. Kamala Harris, now Vice President of the U.S., stated that Black and Latino defendants are far more likely to be executed than their white counterparts. Poor defendants, without a team of lawyers, are far more likely to be placed on death row than those with strong representation. Your race and your bank account should not determine your sentence. Third, it does not deter crime. The American Civil Liberties Union states that the death penalty has no deterrent effect. Claims that execution deters a certain number of crimes have been discredited by social science research. As a remedy for crime, it has no purpose and no effect. Additionally, it diverts resources from genuine crime control measures. This is money that could otherwise be used for crime prevention, mental health and drug treatment, education and rehabilitation, and meaningful victim services. On top of that, it diverts resources from existing components of the criminal justice system, such as prosecutions of drug crimes, domestic violence, and child abuse. Of course, with support, there is also opposition. Here are some objections to the call to abolish the death penalty. The first is justice and an eye for an eye principle, which essentially means the punishment should fit the crime. According to the class survey, those who argued to keep the death penalty in place stated that people who commit horrific and appalling crimes deserve to die as retribution for the crimes committed. However, once again, this completely goes against our human right to life and is inhumane. Second, death cannot be reversed if new evidence is revealed. Once it's done, it's done. There's no going back. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, the U.S. death penalty system flagrantly violates the human rights law. Moreover, methods of execution and death row conditions have been condemned as inhumane, violent, or degrading treatment, and even torture. The U.S. death penalty system has also failed to protect the innocent. From 1973 through December 2014, 150 innocent people have been exonerated from death row. That's 150 innocent people who could have been murdered for something that they did not do. The second argument is closure for victims and victims' loved ones of traumatic experiences. Families of victims who have been through traumatic experiences and even murder usually receive closure when their abuser is dead, and that's when they can maybe recover from the traumatic incident. However, according to the Death Penalty Information Center, science suggests that achieving closure through execution may be a myth, and growing numbers of families of homicide victims oppose capital punishment and do not want it pursued in the death of their loved ones. Also, in a magazine titled "In From Death into Life," author Lisa Merther writes, "For many, the death penalty provides neither the closure nor the healing that legal and political systems oftentimes promise. Instead, a growing number of victims' families are saying it inhibits that healing." Another example is the homicide of author Brooke Douglas's family. As a teenager, 2 men barged into his home, held his family hostage, killed his parents, and raped his sister right in front of him. Years later, he was able to watch one of those men, Stephen Hatch, be executed. In an article titled "Is Vengeance Better for Victims Than Forgiveness?", author Brooke Douglas states that seeing Hatch executed brought him closure, only because he knew that he wouldn't have to keep going back to the trials. But when he met with Glenn Ake, the other man, and forgave him, that's what brought him peace. See, this just comes to show that the death penalty doesn't necessarily bring the closure that most would expect. Now, what is being done to head towards the journey to abolish the death penalty? The solution is to look beyond capital punishment and to find alternative ways to reduce violent crime and ultimately restore justice. It is our duty as a society to take action in order to protect the rights of all human beings. An organization known as Amnesty International have been campaigning to advocate to abolish the death penalty for years. They've been supporting abolitionist movement at national, regional, and global levels. They've also been attempting to expose and hold governments accountable that still continue to use inhumane and degrading punishment. Incentive to help police is also another one. Plea bargaining is actually used in many countries, and this is the process in which a criminal gets a reduced sentence where death is a possible sentence in exchange for providing help to the police. Sentence of life without parole has also been expanded. This essentially means you spend the rest of your life in prison. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, as the use of life without parole has expanded, the number of death sentences has declined dramatically. States have also looked beyond punishment to alternative ways of reducing violent crime, such as community policing, the introduction of crime-fighting technology, and restorative justice. If we work towards abolishing the death penalty, the world may become a better and an even more positive place, where death isn't the answer. For one, there could be life for those who are actually innocent. Countless have been released from death row. There's also been a decrease in support for capital punishment. In a journal titled "The Rhetoric for Abolition," the continuity and change in the struggle against America's death penalty from 1900 to 2020, attorney Richard C. Dieter states that today the U.S. seems to be on the road to abolishing the death penalty. Support for capital punishment, which for the last quarter of the 20th century has been firmly entrenched, is weakening. Additionally, tax money could be put in much better use. Kamala Harris, now Vice President of the U.S., also states that California would have saved $150 million if the death penalty is replaced with the sentence of life without parole. That's money that could be used for school, healthcare, or even restorative justice programs. As a living human being on Earth, each and every one of us must do what we can to work towards abolishing the death penalty, because we have that right to life. And although mistakes are constantly made, what good comes out of death as the conclusive punishment? Life is short as it is, and thus execution is not a probable solution, as it is backed up by many studies that it does not deter or prevent crime. It is inhumane and not to mention irreversible. We must look beyond capital punishment, as there are alternative methods to reduce crime and ultimately restore justice, as previously discussed. I will leave everyone with this last thought. Does executing the murderer bring the victim back to life? Does executing the murderer make the victim's families forget the crime was even committed? Thank you everyone for listening.